Björn Andrésen rose to fame in the early 70s as the most beautiful boy in the world when he was cast in the movie Death in Venice, directed by Luchino Visconti. He was hurled into a world of perverted men who objectified him while the people applauded. His tragic childhood was thus followed by a tragic life. Björn is the face of the ugliness that has become the norm in the society, that resulted from inversion and objectification of beauty, of the abuse and debauchery we allowed to thrive. My blood boils when I think that we allowed and still allow children to be exploited by such perverted minds as the one of Luchino Visconti, and the alike, every time we normalise debauchery. I feel deep sympathy for Björn, and do wish from the bottom of my heart that he will find the peace in his heart he's been so desperately yearning for his entire life. When I saw the details of his story in the documentary The Most Beautiful Boy in the World, I was very intrigued and decided to elucidate what happened to him psychologically. Face analysis. From the first instance, it's visible that Björn is an emotionally underdeveloped child that desperately needs a maternal or fraternal figure to nourish him emotionally and fill in the deficits. As we develop, the expression our faces adopt doesn't solely depend on genetics. It's shaped by the environment we find ourselves in, as we produce facial reactions in response to the outer stimuli. For example, have a look at the author of The Little Prince, Saint-Exupery. Reading The Little Prince is like reading the author's psyche laid bare. The symbols are explicit. For example, the famous picture of the prince and the thorny rose refers to the not-so-pleasant experiences between the man and the woman that began in the childhood with the mother. The man's infantile self hindered by the underdeveloped anima. Saint-Exupery was clearly affected by the Puer Aeternus, or eternal child, or Peter Pan syndrome. This problem is almost always associated with the mother complex. Exupery's mother was what Carl Jung called the terrible, devouring mother, the one that refuses to let the child grow up. In her case, this affliction was so strong that she preferred her son dead rather than alive, self-sufficient and in a functional relationship. The son in turn keeps returning to the mother. He wanders from one relationship to another, never finding satisfaction or settling down. He's seeking his mother in other women. The way I would interpret this is that the man is stuck trying to extricate himself from the devouring mother throughout his life by emulating adventurous relationships only for the opportunity to escape from them. The lack of commitment isn't entirely due to the man's own volatility. It's an unconscious desire to become independent and develop one's own sense of self. However, the conflict is repressed, the problem isn't acknowledged consciously, and therefore the unconscious drives one into emulation of extrication. This man thus becomes fickle and promiscuous. In Saint-Exupery's case, this clearly fed into his own death drive, which followed him his entire life, and his book is the outpouring of his unconscious, and it did indeed predict his death. Alternatively, the man keeps seeking a woman that would embody his ideal image, a mother goddess inserted into his unconscious by the experiences with the mother. This can also happen when the mother is lost, as the image becomes an object of desperate search, an idealized projection. As we will see, with some specific modifications, this is what happens to Björn Andrésen. But to get back to the point, looking at Exupery's face is like looking into the face of a baby stretched into the face of a grown-up. It's a great reflection of his childhood development and of his adult psychological profile, with the main complex found in his psyche laid bare for all to see. The way Björn bears himself in the footage from his youth is not much different from the one from now in his old age. He seems lost in the world, without an anchor or a wall to support him. He levitates, desperately looking for the ground. He's like Adam from Eden, the world of innocence, without any knowledge of the real world, thrown into the world of chaos and destruction. Tragedy speaks out of his face. There's a great sadness in his eyes, and behind each smile. The gaze is always searching for something, perhaps answers or an abode. It's melancholic and dreamy. The facial expression is that of confusion and loss. It's the face of someone who gets abandoned suddenly without any explanation. Why? What did I do? Where should I go? These questions scream out of his face. As he grows older, very little changes. His voice is very mild, mellifluous, almost as if he wasn't present, as if he were to disappear any second.
Yes, I do, definitely. I've done films, at least one, in different in different parts.
When he sings, it's the voice of learned helplessness. His personality failed to attain its full potential and shape. He's not established securely in the world, and his gestures and expression testify to it. The facial features remain boyish even in old age. The hint of femininity suggests the prominence of delicate traits in his personality. If his development didn't go wrong, I would see him as a person with a great ability to express his artistic traits via music, for example. He clearly has a creative personality, but its expression is held back by the depression. In some cases, however, a great portion of creativity comes from neurosis itself, as is clear from what is said about artists and their fickle, dreamy, somewhat psychotic or weary nature. This, I would suspect, comes from the urgent need of the unconscious to communicate with a conscious that refuses to listen. The stronger the rejection, the stronger the pressure from the unconscious, all in an effort to make the personality whole by integrating the rejected parts. Now, where does this all come from? In Björn's case, the reason is clear. His mother disappeared suddenly when he was 10. She never returned, and although it was clear she took her own life, it was never discussed with the kids nor acknowledged. All they knew was that she died. The huge hole her sudden disappearance and absence left in the developing Björn brought with itself great sadness and depression that followed him his whole life. At such a young age, you don't yet understand. All you feel is great despair and confusion. You blame yourself. Since this blame is internalized, you need an external figure to go to you, reassure you, and explain to you that it's not your fault. When this doesn't happen, you will grow up and move on, but the subconscious hole never gets sealed. It'll be there at the back of your mind, and it'll show in your behavior. The sense of self is somewhat lost. A mother complex develops, with its characteristics influenced by other circumstances. For example, it can lead to development of narcissism in an effort to survive the abandonment. As children, we are completely lost in this world. The parent is the secure anchor that introduces the child into the world. Correct parenting style provides, most importantly, an opportunity for the child to make mistakes without rejection. The child is to be corrected, but most importantly has to know that it has a secure shelter it can return to, and a supporting ground it can bounce off of and return safely to. Apart from that, emotional nourishment is the backbone of a functional personality. At first, when the parent is absent, the child will experience terrible anxiety and cortisol levels go up. But this is a sign of healthy attachment. As the parent returns, cortisol levels decrease. The child is soothed, healthy brain development is promoted, and therefore healthy personality formation can take place. When this anxiety persists and is never tuned down, psychopathology is free to develop. The HPA axis is dysregulated and the brain is constantly flooded by high levels of cortisol. Some children become aggressive, narcissistic and aversive, signaling great need for contact and attention. Others withdraw, become unresponsive, and eventually melancholic and depressed. Emotions are often repressed or cannot be experienced fully, which is clearly Björn's case, as we will see later. Personality and behavioral pattern formation rely heavily on biological processes, intertwined with the effects of parenting behaviors and individual experiences with the environment. The purpose of nurturing is to support the child in growing an independent sense of self. As the child grows, he learns that there is an I that sets him apart from the others, and he slowly detaches from the parental projection and learns to stand on his own feet. But this is a gradual process, and it requires some nudging so that the child doesn't remain attached forever, but also so that he's not thrown into the world and abandoned, which unfortunately was Björn's case. The child, now a grown-up, either flies high in the sky, unable to commit to anything seriously, or walks with an unidentifiable void on the sleeve, forever looking for his place in the world he doesn't understand, drowning in self-pity and despair. Parents. Parents play a crucial role in the child's life also because they are invested with certain divinity, idolized and assimilated into the child's developing ego. As Jung pointed out, quote, "Children have no psychology of their own," end of quote. As we grow up, separation from this must occur if the child is to become an individual, that is, individual, something that is not divisible, not dual, referring to the two images of the father and the mother, or in other words, if a separate character that belongs to the person is to be found. Infantility is what happens when this fails to occur. Let's look at why this is Björn's case. Loss of a most beloved object generates great anxiety and grief, both in children and adults. But the fact that this object has a purpose in the child's development makes matters worse for the former. If the child isn't taught how to mourn and eventually move on, it shields itself from the tsunami of emotion and anxiety that could eventually lead to disintegration if fully expressed. Repression thus creates more repression. That creates repression of emotion, emotional paralysis, and therefore stunted emotional development. This is consistent with Björn's behavior over the years, and is confirmed by his own words after the loss of his 9-month-old son. Quote, "I was paralyzed. I cannot feel sad. I just feel paralyzed." End of quote. Björn's father was an absent father. Additionally, he was never identified. That tends to lead to a particular psychopathology that differs in boys and girls. In Björn's case, he doesn't really know how to embody the role of a father to his own kids. As for the mother, she was depressed and drank a lot, for which Björn took blame. In his documentary, it is mentioned that, quote, "His bohemian mother, Barbara, never told him the identity of his father, he still doesn't know, and made no secret that she wanted more from life than being mother to Björn and his half-sister. He recalls standing behind her as a little boy as she stared silently out of a window and thinking, 'When I grow up, I'm going to save Mum.'" End of quote. This suggests that his mother had been absent long before she vanished and committed suicide. This leads us to the archetypal death mother, grief and mortification. In such situations, there's a strong inner conflict in the child's developing psyche. First, there's a feeling of inadequacy and shame. The child internalizes the mother's own problems and sees itself as their cause. He therefore takes upon himself to make the mother's life better. This is a grave task that forces the child to grow up rapidly at the cost of self-development. Perhaps slightly ironically, this results in infantilism. Second, she committed a suicide, which further reinforces the idea that I, the child, caused her demise. Those who grow up with a death mother tend to become incarcerated by the belief that they are victims to their own supposed inadequacy. Additionally, due to her sudden and permanent absence, she remained in the boy's unconscious as a divine image that one got separated from. What Björn has been seeking his entire life is this reunion with that motherly image. This is a projection that is never internalized and becomes an everlasting burden that manifests itself in persistent grief. Since reunion is impossible, drinking becomes a substitution and depression a response to its clear insufficiency. Living becomes a chore. Death drive follows each step taken. The only solution is to acknowledge the projection, internalize it, and give way to the experience of grief instead of its suppression. To make things worse, his grandmother exploits him through a narcissistic extension of her desires to make him famous and gain money. Instead of filling in the role of the mother, something Björn needed to move on past the attachment to the dead projection, she repeats what happened to Björn when his mother vanished. she throws him alone into the world, in which he becomes prey to lascivious, debauched perverts. He is objectified, which further distances him from the reunion with his inner self, which remains underdeveloped for his whole life, and confirms in his mind that he's an empty shell adored for its colour and shape only. This is remarkably similar to the story of Cole Sprouse. His mother was a single mother of 2 twin boys. Björn has a twin sister. Well, it's semi-twin actually. Same mother, different fathers. It's extremely rare. Who suffered from mental illness, especially narcissism and drug abuse. She was also artistic like Björn's mother. She was a painter. Björn's mother was a photographer, painter and journalist. She also sacrificed her children to the film industry for money and fame, just like Björn's grandmother. No wonder Björn has a mother complex. Behaviours. This is clearly reflected in Björn's behaviour as an adult. To fill the void, he developed an alcohol addiction. He had children of his own, but was an absent paternal figure. He couldn't provide something he did not understand. He was careless, absent-minded, and disinterested in anything related to life. His son died very young of sudden infant death syndrome. This is a common occurrence in children that lack external stimulation, such as touch, or in simple but very true words, it's a result of a lack of love. And Björn himself is fully aware of his condition. However, he shouldn't blame himself for it, as that forms a significant part of his neurosis. To free up the blocked libido and restore the joy found in living is difficult for such cases, but of vital importance. For Puer Aeternus, manual and collective work is helpful. They need support of their community and an opportunity to contribute to something greater than themselves, to restore the sense of importance and belonging. That, however, doesn't play too much on the ego, which is, as you can see, feeble in its confidence in some cases and overconfident in others, such as in Exupery's. Underneath, however, lie great blame and a lack of confidence. The experience must therefore be genuinely supportive towards the regrowth of the stunted self. Objectification. Björn's innocence played a role in the development of his beauty and unfortunately converted him into an object of soulless desire and superficial admiration. This inner experience of absence added to his angelical look and made him seem otherworldly, impossible to resemble. He was an ideal prey for the ravenous, superficial demons of this world. When beauty becomes so objectified, it loses its essence, it loses heart. The world focused on Björn's looks, squeezed them dry and let the inside rot. But there are always things we can alter thanks to the magic of neuroplasticity. It has been shown that psychotherapy can result in detectable changes in the brain. For example, the activity of the orbitofrontal cortex involved in emotional regulation can be normalized, and the limbic system, which tends to overreact to threatening stimuli and anxiety disorders, can be mollified.